Story 1. Officer Chuck Vail, on night duty, responded to a call from a concerned neighbor who had not seen the old lady who lived next door for a while, and they were growing rather concerned. This call was received unusually late, at around 3:00 in the morning. It was thundering and lightning, very, very frightening. It was also extremely cold. Something felt off. The officer first went to speak to the person who made the call. Why did they ring so late? The neighbor stated the lady next door was in her 90s. The neighbor had knocked several times, and no response. It was playing in the neighbor's mind. She had to ring. The police officer went over to the old lady's house and knocked on the door. No answer. He could see a huge stack of mail behind the door as he shone his flashlight. The officer went around the back. He once again shone his flashlight through the window. Only the darkness and silence greeted him. She was probably laying there, dead on the floor, thought the officer with good reason. He did, however, see a glow emanating from a window placed about 7 feet from the ground. The neighbor ran and got a bucket for the officer to stand on. The cop could now see the light was coming from a TV in the living room. He didn't need his flashlight to see, as the TV now provided enough light to make out that nothing appeared to be out of place. The officer turned to tell the neighbor everything seemed okay. Then the officer turned back round to have one final look in the window. The police officer fell backwards as he looked into the window and saw an old lady's sinister-looking face staring right back at him with dark eyes. He quickly got up and stepped back onto the bucket. His heart was racing like a wild stallion. He looked back through the window. He could see an old lady stood in the hallway in the pitch-black darkness. She turned to look at the officer and stared at him for a moment, then walked into the darkness. The police officer was unsettled. He stepped down and walked the concerned neighbor back to her house and told her the old lady is alive, but to not go back to the house. It started to rain hard. The police officer could not even look at the old lady's house. He was frightened. He got into the patrol car and sped off like a lightning bolt. He went back to the police department. He never inquired about the old sinister lady who lived there. He did not want to know what became of her. He had nothing to do with that house ever again, and that was how he wanted it. Story 2. For this tale, we head all the way down to a very remote town in Australia. Several locals rang the police to report a man who was freaking them out. The locals, it seemed, were frightened beyond their wits. They insisted he was a witch doctor and wanted him turfed out of Dodge. 2 police officers arrived in town, rather amused by the calls from people scared of a witchcraft performing man. There he was, the slightly unkempt elderly Aboriginal man with a hazy look in his eyes. The officers questioned him and found he lived a fair distance away, over 100 miles away so it was. Truth, the 2 officers thought as they submitted to the fact they were going to have to drive a 90-minute-plus journey to get the man back to where he came from. The police officers put in their patrol car and headed towards his town. Job done. The terrified locals will be happy, and the 2 police officers could hopefully have a stress-free night. As they sped towards the witch doctor's town, they were a little unnerved, as they could see the man just staring at them in the rearview mirror's reflection. He did not appear to blink, he would just stare. Over an hour later they'd arrived. They released the man, and he just stood there not saying a word. As the two officers drove off, the police car sped through the roads, traveling at a speed of 70 to 90 miles an hour. Around 45 minutes later, they were back in their town of jurisdiction. To their shock, they saw the same elderly Aboriginal man in the same clothes sat on the street corner. How was this possible? The police officers wondered if the man did actually possess powers of witchcraft. There was no rational explanation for it, and they never found one. Story 3. Waltham Abbey Police Station in the UK, a very old, built in the 19th century building located opposite an abbey church. It's a place steeped in history. It's also haunted, very, very haunted. One of the ghosts which haunts the old police station was a Metropolitan Police Sergeant who sadly committed suicide in one of the custody rooms. Many people have seen coins fly off tables. This ghost also likes to switch on the photocopier and starts printing off. Using several sheets of paper could come in handy that side of the spirit. Who knows? Noise have also been heard from the custody room where he hung himself. Policing staff have been in there on their own and felt like somebody was watching them. They would sometimes feel somebody breathing on the back of their neck. A voice could sometimes be heard, but there would never be anyone there. The creepiest thing people would experience is the footsteps. They would be near the area when they would suddenly hear footsteps behind them. Quickly turning around, people would expect to see somebody there, but there wasn't, yet the footsteps would still come towards them. That's when it's time to get the hell out of there. There is a rather sinister ghost that has been seen by a few members of the policing community. Once you hear this about this ghost, you may want to look behind you. A station worker one night observing CCTV footage of the Waltham Abbey Police Station car park saw a tall figure all in black wearing a black cloak. The figure just seemed to be stood there. Then the image flickered onto another area of the car park. By the time the camera focused on the same area again, the cloaked figure was gone. Just a few weeks later, the same employee was working late one night. He had just finished a long night shift. It was time to go. They headed to the car park and sat in the car, taking a brief moment to relax. To their horror, as they looked in the rearview mirror, they could see the black cloaked figure stood in the car park behind the car. The figure did not move. Alarmed and unsettled, he got out of the car. The figure was gone in the second or two it took for him to get out of his car. The cloaked figure had simply vanished. One time, a police officer had a strange, creepy experience that shook him to the core. He had heard about the dark cloaked figure, but had never, thankfully, had to deal with it himself. Until one dark night, an elderly lady suffering with dementia had made a call. She was frantic and distressed, as she was lost in nearby Epping Forest. A lone police officer took the dispatch call and went to find the lady. He soon found the lady upset and scared. He began to calm her down. Soon the old lady was feeling less distressed. She turned to the police officer and asked, "Where is the other man who he attended with?" The police officer, thinking it was due to her dementia, told her he had come alone, to which she replied, looking him straight in the eyes,
"No, you didn't. You were with a man in a long black cloak."
Story 4. This next story concerns a police officer whose web name is KC1354. We shall call him Officer K, for this truly hairs on your arms will stand tale. Officer K was a police officer enforcing the law in a rural, small town in Nebraska, USA, back in the 90s. It was wintertime. There were snow blizzards aplenty. As he patrolled the town, there were quite a few abandoned houses in town. And Officer K would patrol the area, keeping an eye or two on them. He would make sure nobody was in there. A lot of thieves would go in these empty houses and steal the copper, so a copper would make sure this wouldn't happen so often. Around 7 p.m., he checked out one house in particular that seemed to attract a lot of thieves and urban explorers. Everything looked fine. All the windows were shut, as were all the doors. He got back in his patrol car and did some more patrolling. Around 9 p.m., he drove past the house once more. He noticed the back door was wide open. It was definitely shut before. He got out of the patrol car. The first thing he noticed was that there were no footprints in the snow leading up to or around the house. This was a little strange. Officer K called dispatch and asked for a local county sheriff to attend as he was about to enter the house. The house appeared to look down at him, desolate, dark, and looming. Inside he stepped. He shone his flashlight and could see the house had been torn apart through ages of neglect and vandalism. The plaster on the walls was ripped open, no doubt because of copper thieving. Maybe the wind had blown the door open. He was about to secure the door and leave when he heard a loud bang from upstairs. What the hell was that? He thought. Then he heard the laughter of children. He shouted,
"This is the police. Come downstairs."
Nothing. Then he heard the children playing again. He radioed dispatch and told them he could hear children in the house. He felt like running out, but he couldn't. He ventured forward in the dark, looking at every shape in the darkness as he walked through the living room and the kitchen. He heard 2 more bangs as he went upstairs. He could still hear the children laughing and playing. As he stepped onto the landing, the sound of the children stopped. The silence was deafening. There were 3 bedrooms. One was straight ahead facing him, a doorway to darkness. The other 2 bedrooms were to the left and right of him. He suddenly heard a loud bang come from the left bedroom. He slowly opened the door and looked inside.
Sorry, I could not resist. Carry on.
The room was empty, apart from wood and plaster on the floor, neatly put into a pile in the middle of the room. On top of the pile was a children's book. It was open. There was a childlike picture of a police officer on the open page. Police Officer K felt a cold, icy shiver down his spine. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He quickly checked the other 2 bedrooms. They were empty. He secured the door and made like a shepherd and got the flock out of there. He would never step foot in there ever again.
Incy Wincy Snow out up the waters.
Did you lock your door? Sleep tight.